Hello and welcome back to the show. So I'm really excited about my guest today, Craig Kinchelow, because he is not only a top real estate agent in the Tampa market, he is also one of the top luxury real estate agents in that market as well. And he's helping other real estate agents break into the luxury market, teaching real estate agents how to get into that space, which I know a lot of agents are very interested in as they progress in their careers. So, Craig, welcome to the show, man. Super excited to have you here and share a little bit of your wisdom.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Kobe. I'm excited to spend some time with you and have a conversation.
Absolutely. So, before we get started, I would love for you to have an opportunity to share a little bit about who you are, your journey in real estate, and really what helped you become a top luxury agent in your market. So that way, our audience have an understanding of who you are and where we go from there.
Awesome. Yeah. So I got exposed to real estate at about 16 years old. I lived in the same home from zero, from birth to 16. And my mom was nice enough to let me be involved in the home search process and listen to ideas and the way I looked at value and pros and cons and all that stuff. And that was my first taste of real estate. Like, this is kind of an interesting industry. Fast forward 2 years later, I graduated high school and was going over to a friend of a friend's house. At the time, it was the nicest house, nicest neighborhood I had ever been in, and I saw all these luxury cars out front. And asked the obvious question, which was, "What does your dad do?" And he's a real estate developer. And I'm like, "Well, what is that?" I had no idea what a real estate developer was at the time. And he's like, "Well, those like strip plazas on the road. There's retail stores and grocery stores and things like that." Well, he buys the land, builds it, and then rents them out. I said, "Oh, okay, cool." Mental note, real estate developer. That's something I may want to do when I grow up. Fast forward a year later, I'm in college and I meet a guy, and his dad's the largest privately owned residential developer in South Florida. Saw the lifestyle that they had. Second mental note, real estate developer. So I ended up getting my real estate license in college and dropped out of college. However, I was on the honor roll. I always like to preface that. So I didn't fail out. I chose to drop out and pursue a career in real estate. And I ended up getting my mortgage license, doing that for a couple of years. And then what I thought was the best way to become a real estate developer was get a job with a national home builder, work my way up to become division president, do that for some years, and then break off and do my own thing. And that's the path I was on. I worked my way up to portfolio manager for a big national home builder. And then 2008 happened, or really the end of 2007 is when it started here in Florida. And so I had to pivot and got into different realms where I was working with real estate investors, buying up some of the neighborhood inventory for the builders. Then I got into short sales, had a loss mitigation company with some partners. Then I got into flipping. I was flipping a lot of the short sales during the downturn because I was selling so many of them to real estate investors. And it took me a while, a slow learner sometimes, to realize I'm making these guys all the money. Why am I just selling them to them and making a commission? So started buying them and initially wasn't flipping them and then started renovating and flipping them and whatnot. And that was a good run. And then I had to reinvent myself. And that's kind of the theme in my career is constant reinvention. Sometimes it's my own choice. And sometimes the market forces me to reinvent myself. Or if I want to continue to do well, I must adapt, right? And so in 2014 is when I say I started my career as a realtor. I had a lot of real estate experience, but I never gone on a normal listing presentation before, never had done a buyer consultation, prospected for expireds, worked at real database really well. The basic skills to do well in what I call general real estate. I really didn't have experience in doing those. So I had to hone my skills and it was humbling. It took me, a little bit of time to get that going and started dialing in. And then, you start to try different things when you're new to real estate. You try different things and you kind of figure out, what works and what you enjoy doing, what complements your strengths and those types of things. I'm a big believer it's not a one size fits all. There's many, many ways to be successful in this business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you took an interesting approach. There's a lot of different ways that agents kind of get into becoming a real estate agent. A lot of times I feel like, real estate agents almost take the opposite approach that you have, where, they become an agent first and then they, try to become a developer, right, on the back end. So you kind of took almost the opposite approach, right, where you're working mostly with builders and want to become a developer, and then later on, as your career progressed, you became an agent afterwards. That's kind of the almost like a little bit different path that you took than most traditional agents do.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. I think Steve Jobs has the quote, you can only connect the dots looking back, right? And when you're going through certain things and you're like, you think that this is your trajectory over here and you're over here and then back here and then here and then here. But you hope that through all the zigzagging, you're heading in the right overall direction. And I have been. And one of my superpowers, I believe we all have different superpowers, and sometimes it's our life experiences, our work experiences, God's gifts that they give us. One of mine is just having a very diverse background in real estate. It's a huge value add for my clients. I understand construction. I know the costs of, new construction costs, the cost of renovations. I understand quality of construction, how things should be done, sourcing vendors, all those types of things. I have relationships with builders, which we'll talk a little bit more about how I've leveraged that into the luxury market. But all those things, even being a mortgage broker for about 1.5 to 2 years. So I have a good finance background with that, right? So, uh, the more skills, the more knowledge we can acquire as a real estate agent, the more valuable we're going to be to our clients, right? And so I'm always trying to learn and stack things like that.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad that you brought that up as well, that the fact that you have such an extensive experience in real estate allows you to offer a better service, allows you to offer more value to your clients. So, when you got into real estate, you mentioned in 2014, right, when you began your career as a real estate sales agent, as a realtor. Did you start right away and jump into the luxury market, or is that something you kind of worked up to later on in your career?
No, no, I had, I had been part of some referral sources like referral networks where, they'll send you a lead, online marketing companies, and then they pay a referral. So that was one source of my business to get buyers. And then, I tried some other things. I tried a lot of prospecting, um, expired for sale by owners. I learned real quickly that uh, for sale by owners is not my strength based on my personality and my demeanor. I'm more of expired kind of guy. And then I started doing some really creative direct mail marketing to have some synergy to my prospecting as well. And so that I became one of the top expired agents in the area. And in terms of luxury, it wasn't like super luxury, but it was in the suburbs, in this higher price range, below, above the median price range by about 15%, maybe 25%, but not real super luxury or anything like that. And the reason why is that just happened to be which types of homes were expiring, right? So I went to where the opportunity was, and that's what I was doing. I didn't really start to, I would do some luxury here and there, but nothing consistently. It was more like a referral type of thing. It kind of fell in my lap. But I wasn't systematically, pragmatically trying to get luxury listings until 2019, I would say, is when I started to think about that. And so what happened then is, at the time I was going through a divorce, and my ex-wife and I, we did real estate together, from about 2010, 11 until about 2018 or so. And we had, at one point we had four businesses. We had the real estate investing, flipping business. We had the loss mitigation business. We had the real estate brokerage business. And then we had another like little construction type business, right? So we had a good run together. But when I was going through the divorce, I decided I wanted to move back to an area where I had previously lived, which is a very affluent zip code. And I'm like, you know what? I want to get as much business in this area as possible. I thought about all the different ways I could door knock, I could, circle prospect the area, I could, farm with direct mail, I could run, certain targeted ads. Back then you could do that a little bit better than today, with the changes. Um, and I decided that I would buy Zillow for that zip code. I just thought that that was going to give me the most control in terms of getting business now, right? I wanted to get business quickly. I didn't want to wait a year to farm to start to see some results. Not to say that you can get results faster, but generally it's a longer play. And so that's was my start into luxury. And so it's amazing the people that I met through that. I mean, very people that you might know, very successful business owners that have businesses around the country and around the globe. Some entrepreneurs, some athletes. There's a lot of people that use search portals. Zillow just happens to be the one that's used probably the most. But you have to be able to convert those leads, right? Generating the lead is one part of it, but converting those was a whole nother part. So that was my start into luxury. And then it just compounds. So every time I'm doing something, I'm trying to find synergy, right? It's like, all right, well, if I'm doing this and this is going well, what can I add to that that will complement that? Instead of one plus one equaling two, one plus one can equal more than two through asymmetrical growth. So what came from that is I was in a lot of the homes. So now I knew the lay of the land, so to speak, the homes that were for sale. So I could be like, oh, I was in that home and hear about that home. Actually, the floor plan was a little bit quirky over here because of XYZ. Only things that you would know being inside the home, right? You're not going to see those through things. So now I become the local expert, then I get to interact with all the luxury agents, the listing agents. So, I want my interactions to be as professional as possible because I want to build, relationships with those agents. Why? Because they might send me off market, listing opportunities, right? They might let me know, things that are happening before they're, happening. Especially in my area, there's a lot of tear downs. And if they work for one of the small builders, they might tell me about something that they have that's getting ready to start construction and they might be open to going under contract sooner. So that just, again, positions me, the expert, in front of my buyers, giving them opportunity to off market deals, right? And in the luxury market, that's super important. Any agent that has access to off-market properties, your perceived value goes up exponentially, right? So that's one of the things that it kind of snowballed. And then understanding the language of real estate. One of my mentors told me a long time ago, he's like, I can take any newly licensed agent and spend 6 months with them, and they will sound more like a professional, more like an expert than an agent that's been selling for 20 years. And the way he describes on how to do that is teaching the agent the language of real estate. How to speak about absorption rates, month supply of inventory, list to sales price ratios, things like that. I even take it one step further, knowing what percentage of homes require at least one or more price adjustments before going under contract and selling. I want to know what percentage of homes are listed for sale and that are leaving the market, failing to sell. I want to position myself as a market expert, and anybody can do that. That's the great thing because we all have access to the same data. It's just which agents are going to spend the time and learn how to speak the language of real estate, right? So that's one of the things that I'm a big, believer on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that as well, that how you were able to present the data to your, potential clients because when you first started out, you worked a lot of expires, right? So you probably have a better understanding of how a lot of these, homes that are being listed and, how long they're going to stay on the market and how many of them are, leaving the market, either being sold or expired as a listing, right? Not being sold as well. So you actually have that experience that you can offer. And now you're just doing it in essentially in a different space, right? In the luxury space as you begin to interact with more more clients in that specific market. So when you jumped into kind of more focusing on luxury real estate and luxury clients, did you see like a big change in either your day-to-day activities as an agent or maybe your interactions with clients as an agent? Or maybe to contrary belief to some agents out there, it's almost kind of remained the same, but you're just interacting with clients maybe on a different level and just providing maybe a little bit more value to fewer people.
Yeah, I mean, some of the conversations are going to be the same regardless, right? Whether it's luxury or whether it's an average priced client. But there are more nuanced conversations with some luxury agents, or sorry, some luxury clients. Some of them they want to know how the sausage is made, right? They want all the details and all that, and they want you to walk them through that so they feel educated and they feel part of the process. And then there are others that are just super busy and just get it done and stand out of, get out of your way, right? Um, I still want them involved a little bit because for me, it's about clearly articulating expectations. First, number one, understanding their expectations, and then being able to articulate those back to them and get an agreement on that. And then at a minimum, delivering on those expectations. But ultimately, what I try to do is exceed those expectations, right? And I memorialize those expectations down into an email and recapture it, and so with them. And then guess what? At the end, I grade myself in front of them. I send them a recap email. Here's what we talked about when we first met. You wanted to sell at this price. You wanted to sell by this date. Here's what I predicted would happen. And I go through it step by step and see how I measured up, right? Most agents aren't willing to put themselves under that kind of microscope. But by holding yourself accountable on that, number one, it builds confidence with your client because you're taking ownership. And luxury clients want to work with people that take ownership in what they do. And then number two, it provides built-in case studies, which I'm a big believer in. Again, it's finding synergy. So it's like, how do I take one deal and turn it into multiple deals, right? And so every transaction is the opportunity to leverage that for more transactions. And so the last year or so, I've been becoming obsessed with having case studies for everything, and you can, you know, there's so many ways to do case studies, whether it's a buyer representation, seller representation. You can segment it out in so many different ways. And, one of my mentors about 2 years ago said something to me that really still resonates with me. And he said, Craig, it's about proof, not promise. So it's about providing just undeniable proof to the clients where you're not having to make unfounded promises, right? And that's how one of the ways I differentiate myself is I bring in so much proof. And, some agents, if they're just starting, they're like, well, how do I do that? If I'm just starting? Well, guess what? I just started at one point, right? You're not going to be just starting for the rest of your career. So you got to work where you're at right now with what you have. And maybe you start doing case studies with other agents in your brokerage, different, come up with different creative ways on that. And then, just do a heck of a job for your clients and then document that process along the way. And as you've been doing this longer and longer and longer, pretty soon you're going to have an undeniable library of proof that is going to make your job so much easier. And so the goal in real estate for me is how can the next year be even easier? And it doesn't mean that I'm working less hard necessarily, but how do I make it even easier? How do I make the sales process have even less friction? And that's with a lot of proof, and setting that proof before I even, have that first conversation with the client, right? And because usually clients are researching you on Google, on social media platforms, right? And so how do you just stack that proof? By the time they actually pick up the phone and call you, they're already pretty much sold. It's just my job not to drop the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like when agents talk about getting reviews, right? Getting reviews on their Google profile, on their Facebook page. It's so important to get that testimonial from existing clients that you've already had to do a great job of that. And I love the way that you've kind of painted it as well, is that after, kind of the transaction, after you've done a good, job for your clients, you actually go in and revisit the expectations that you set in the beginning, right, of the interaction, and you grade yourself on it just to make sure that you guys are on the same page And you can take that and turn it into a case study, turn it into a testimonial for your next client, which really, I think, you talked about this earlier as well. It makes not just, lead generation easier, but also lead conversion, right? Because when now somebody's talking with you, they know what you can do. They've seen you do it for other people. So the conversion process now becomes, like you said, easier, makes the transaction process easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Dr. Cialdini has a book, Persuasion and Persuasion, and Persuasion talks a little bit about how do you set it up for success before you ever meet somebody, right? There's things that we can do. And so those are some of the things that I try to, that I have been implementing in my business, over time and just doing such a great job with the clients. That's the most important thing because with luxury clients, they have multiple properties. They have kids that they're buying properties for now, especially now. I mean, days, it's like the world's changed so much. I got a closing here in 2 weeks. It's a $3 million, $2.7 million house. The dad's buying it for his daughter cash, right? And that's happening. I mean, time and time again. We're not necessarily that high of a price range, but still luxury where parents are either helping the kids out in some form or fashion or, paying for it in full. That's where times have kind of shifted in recent years. So there's so many different opportunities with those people. Um, so you want to really take care of them at the highest level. And, you know, obviously money and results is one thing, but time for the luxury market for a lot of them is even more important, right? And so, I think about how can I take on more for my clients, more on my plate and leave less on them and provide them with a better result. So I started doing partial, with my listings, property preparation. It could be from paint and, some paint and some carpet to $250,000 renovation that I've done for a luxury client, and it's like, well, how much did I make off that? That client I probably made, a couple $100,000 in commission over the course of, selling a $2.2 million home, helping them buy two homes over 1 million, another one for 500,000. Kids, you start adding it all up. I've done really well. And how did I do that? I started, with luxury, you can spend more time with the people, right? And because your time to money equation is a lot different than trying to crank out as many units as possible. So I'm always constantly figuring out. And then the cool thing with luxury clients is a lot of them will give you feedback because they're smart entrepreneurs, business owners, executives. A lot of times they'll say, "Hey, what you did here was really valuable to me, really helped me out." And so a lot of times they give me ideas on things that I can either add to or things that I can improve upon. And that's one of the nice things I like about working in the luxury market is just being around really smart, successful people, and it will cause you to become better, smarter in everything that you do.
Absolutely. And the way that you are able to, like you said, not just see the luxury client as like one transaction, right? That you're able to invest in them, invest in that relationship, and to really understand that there's a higher lifetime value on a specific luxury client than just that specific property or just that transaction. It really helps, I think, develop. And then that, for a lot of agents who are working even within a maybe like a medium price range or maybe just slightly above that, those are good practices as well, right? Even if they're not in full luxury, because they're able to now, work with that client, work with their family members, right? For their next transaction, for maybe an investment property, right? Or maybe just a referral, right? To one of their friends that they know. And those are just, different ways of looking at and valuing your clients instead of just seeing them as a specific transaction or just that one commission. And then, like you said as well, working with luxury clients because they have, getting to that point, they would be able to, of course, build up their careers, right, in a successful way as well. There's things that you can actually learn from them, right? It
Yeah.
almost become like a peer-to-peer situation where you're providing them value and then they're letting you know, okay, so these three things or these two things, they're very valuable to me. And then now you can take that and just double down on those things as well. So it's actually very great insights into, how an agent can break into, not just how an agent can break into luxury real estate, but also once they do, how are they able to kind of maintain their client base? their client base as well.
Yeah, and luxury people are usually pretty loyal if you do a great job because they don't want to risk. They have a lot to risk. Their time, money, etc. Right? So to go with somebody that's an unknown versus somebody that's delivered results, and that's why in the luxury market you see a lot of times agents dominating certain areas or certain pockets because a lot in luxury, a lot of them like to work with the people that everybody else works with. It's kind of like that. It's just the way it is a lot of the time. And then sometimes there's people that are the opposite. They don't want to work with that person. So that, it just depends, but that's generally more so than not, because they want proof. You know what I mean? So if an agent is doing a lot of business in that area or whatever, that's undeniable proof, right? And so if you're going against them, you're going to have to figure out a way to differentiate yourself. And so for me, it's all about differentiation. Getting business as an agent, whether it's a seller or buyer, is about differentiation. Selling real estate, whether it's on a listing, it's about differentiation. And even on the buyer side, it's about differentiation. You know, I had a client that was former president of, I don't know, I think the company's like 12 or 14 billion dollars. And you would know it if I said it. And basically, he was going to cancel a contract on a $4.5 million property because there were some legitimate inspection issues. And before he did it, I just sent him the last 4 years worth of inventory for homes that had the water frontage like this house had. It was at the end of a cul-de-sac. So I think it had like, I don't know, somewhere around like 350 feet, 450 feet of water frontage right at the end of the cul-de-sac at the point um, overlooking the intercoastal waterway. I mean, just spectacular, beautiful. So I sent him the email and I just said, hey, listen, over the last, I said, listen, I know this is important to you, having the water frontage, having the view, it being at the end of the cul-de-sac. I don't know how important it is to you, but I want to make sure that you have the data to make an informed decision. So here's the data the last 4 years. Over the last 4 years, there's been one other home that's had comparable water frontage at the end of a cul-de-sac like this home. So if that is very important to you, just keep that in mind because we might be waiting for another 4 years for another one to come on the market. And, he told me after we closed, that was what helped seal the deal for him. And this is ethical sales. I didn't manipulate the data. I went back and really provided him the data and gave him the information that he needed to make an informed decision based on his hierarchy of value system, right? And he valued having that water frontage and dealing with the inspection items, he valued that more, right? So it's just understanding again differentiation. I can't express just study differentiation and always be thinking about every single day, every single interaction. How do I differentiate? You know?
Yeah. You need to know why, right? You need to know why a client will want to work with you, right? What
Yes.
is the reason, right? Why should they choose you as their agent instead of just, another luxury agent or just really any other agent that's out there? So that's really important for an agent to understand that. How can you be different? What unique value can you provide to somebody? How are you able to go out there and really, service other clients in your area as well? All right, so just to wrap up today's episode, Craig, just kind of give us some advice on if an agent were to, want to step into luxury real estate. I know you mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, one of the things that you did was purchasing zip codes on Zillow, and then of course getting to know some of the luxury listing agents as well. But if there was like an agent right now who came up to you and just said, "Hey, I wanted to get into luxury real estate," what are some of the things that you can tell them to help make that transition easier and help them get up and going into the luxury space as quickly as possible?
Yeah. So I think it's first of all, it's important to understand what attributes you have or what maybe experience you have that you could use to your advantage, right? So we all have different backgrounds and we have different strengths and different weaknesses, right? So I'm a big proponent of doubling down on your strengths, right? And then you obviously work on weaknesses. I'm also a big proponent of framework. So I'll kind of give you a framework that I used to transition into the luxury space. So I kind of looked at it like from three categories. One is connections, right? So you want to have connections with people that can afford to buy luxury homes, or people that own luxury homes that want to sell luxury homes, or people that know people that can do those things and can refer you, right? So that's, pillar one. And so the second pillar I kind of looked at was like knowledge. How do I become just like an expert in the luxury real estate market in the areas that I want to be in, right? And then like the third was just like, how do I add more value? Said differently, how do I outwork the competition? And sometimes in the luxury market, there's a lot of people that want to get into that market, are willing to work hard. And there's also a lot of people that have been in that market and have been very successful. And they're at the tail end of their career. And some of the stuff that they used to do, they may not do now, right? Because they don't feel like they have to do that. And that drive, that hunger isn't what it used to be, right? So for me, in terms of connections, one I did was Zillow, as you mentioned, right? So it's like, all right, how do I get in contact with more people? Well, this is the most expensive zip code in my city. So let me, get some Zillow connections through that, right? So that started building a consistent connection flow of buyers, right? And then obviously some of those buyers had houses to sell too, right? So and then connections was agents. How do I get in relationship with agents in the luxury market? And there's different ways to do that. I'm not going to go into in depth, but it just come from a place of how do you add value, right? How can you help them essentially, right? And then the third is for connections was how do I who are those people that could refer me to luxury people, right? It could be CPAs, financial advisors, business owners, those types of people, because usually people hang out with people like them, right? So I want to surround myself with those types of people. Some people went to like do like charity events and different organizations like that. I didn't do a whole lot of that. I did a little bit of it, but that was never a huge focus of mine. And then one thing that I started to do recently in the last year was using social media to become a branded expert in the luxury space. And I found that that's helped my business a lot. Not necessarily that people are reaching out to me from social media, but people somehow learn about me or whatever, and then they go to social media to research me, and then they see that my brand is aligned with luxury. So it makes that process even that much more effective, right? And then the second is knowledge. So for me, it was familiarizing myself with the inventory, going in and looking at as many homes as I can that are coming on the market so that I can speak to them intelligently, both when I get a buyer lead now, but it could be 2 or 3 years later. I'm on a listing appointment and maybe they're talking about a sale, 6 months ago or whatever, and I can tell them, oh, I was in that house 2 or 3 years ago when it sold, and here's what I can tell you about that. That instantly gives you a lot of credibility as a local market expert. So beyond that is the language of real estate and just studying the real estate market. One thing that I did to force myself to do that is I started a digital, I call it a digital magazine. Other people would call it a newsletter, and put it online for a blog. And I pick out new developments in the area, new restaurants, new things like that to become the local expert in luxury space. So that forced me to do research every week because I would send this out every week. I still do. And then the language of real estate is just understanding the month supply of inventory, the listing sales price ratios, all those things that I talked about earlier in the video. And then I hired a prospector. And so I wanted to become the expert of what listings may be coming on the market soon or what sellers are interested in selling, but they just don't want to go through the process of listing their house. So I would have somebody calling constantly when we have a buyer or buyers and trying to match property with them. And so we're building a buyer list. Simultaneously, we're building a list of off-market properties. Whether they're a match for our buyers or not, that's not the point. When I get a luxury buyer, I can say, oh, well, we have 10 off-market properties right now in the area that we know about. Boom, I'm the local market expert, right? And every luxury buyer loves to hear that their agent has access to off-market properties, right? And then the last thing for knowledge is building out those case studies. Proof over promise, as my mentor said. And so over the last couple of years, I've really done a good job of building out case studies. And as you know, especially on the listing side, if I can have any types of records in other neighborhoods, buildings, and stuff like that, I want to be able to articulate that when I go on a listing appointment or when I'm prospecting for listings. And the last thing is outwork, and I just decided how can I add more value than what other agents are going to do. And so one thing that I decided to do was property preparation. I will do a lot in property preparation if the house needs it and the people need it. This is especially helpful if the sellers are out of town, out of the area. They value somebody that can handle everything, as well as if they're busy. They don't want to have to call four different, contractors and micromanage them and do all those things, right? So if we can offer that service, that adds a lot of value to the luxury seller. And then buyer property research, especially with Zillow, a lot of times, some buyers could be standoffish. Some may say, I want to work with the listing agent. There's different objections that naturally you're going to get. So I try to add so much overwhelming value at the beginning before even either before the first communication or shortly thereafter. So I will do like, sales history of the property, permit history of the property. I will try to call the seller's agent and find out the seller motivation, the reason why the seller is selling. I will do research on the seller themselves. I will do supply and demand analysis. I'm sending over a pretty big framework of everything, even the disclosures. Like I'll methodically go through those and have an analysis of what things to consider, additional questions that we want to ask the seller's agent. And generally, it blows the buyers away. I mean, it immediately puts me as an expert. And after you start doing this for a while, it does take a lot of time at the beginning, but then you can build out frameworks, and use AI for a lot of this, as well as get it simplified to where you can have a virtual assistant help with some of this stuff once you get it dialed in. And then beyond the sale, I will be involved. A lot of luxury people, they want like home managers types, people they know who to call and who can help them with things come up. And I don't just provide them with a list of, oh, here's, my vendor list. No, I'm involved in that because that's how I add value. So if they know I'm the go-to person, if they need anything home related, or really anything real estate related, I'm there, beyond the transaction. And then the last niche that I had was new build. So in my area, there's a lot of tear downs. There's not like master plan communities or any of that stuff because I'm more in the city. So I've created a whole builder service program where I help people find tear downs. That's part of the off-market prospecting as well. I'll help them evaluate the lot, understand the trees, the nuances, all the things with the city. Then I'll understand what type of construction they want to build, their budget, what type of architectural style. I'll place them with the right builder that focuses or specializes in that style and is going to also fit their budget. And then I'm involved throughout the build process, helping them make selections and things like that that will help on their resale value. So I very go above and beyond to add so much value. And the cool thing about that is builders have started to see the kind of service and value that I add. And now I'm working with builders. And most notably, recently, I brought a buyer, Zillow lead, to a $2.8 million off market new build. And they saw how much I added value because we worked on adding a pool bath, we added an elevator, we did all this stuff that I was involved in and helped coordinate. And so the builder got me involved, and now we just closed on one lot. We're closing on another lot, and we're going to be building a $3.5 million home and a $4.5 million home. And we're going to be building probably about 20 to $30 million of homes over the next, 18 months or so. And so you just don't know where that connection is going to come from. So always try to be adding as much value as possible.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Craig, for sharing your advice and your value with us here today. So, for any agents out there who's listening to this, watching this, that want to get in touch with you, that want to get started maybe in luxury real estate and maybe want to learn from you directly, what are some of the best ways for agents and just anybody watching this right now to be able to reach back out to you and to stay connected for the long term?
Yeah, so the last year or so, I've started to become active on Instagram, and so it's just my name, Craig Kinchlow, Kincheloe. You can check me out there, or you can shoot me an email, Craig at kinchelogroup.com. Those are probably the best. I'm also on TikTok, same name as well. Those are some of the platforms you guys can check me out on. And if you want to check my newsletter out, I do post a short version of that on my LinkedIn page as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. We'll make sure to leave the links to your Instagram and your LinkedIn page, as well as your email in the description, the show notes down below. But other than that, Craig, just want to say thanks again for being on the show. Before we let you go, is there just any last nuggets, any last piece of advice you just kind of want to leave with us on today?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can be overwhelming when you're just starting something new for the first time, right? It's uncomfortable. Just know that everybody has experienced that. That's maybe they're where you want to be and you're not anywhere near there. All it takes is just the first step and then just focusing in on the next step after that. And as soon as over some time, you'll look up and you'll be amazed at how much you've accomplished. So I would just say take that first step. The sooner you do that, the further the faster you're going to be where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks so much, Craig. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next show. Take
Thanks,
care.
Kobe.